The massive silver ship descended through Earth's atmosphere like a falling star. Inside the observation deck, 12 alien students pressed their faces against the viewing ports, watching the blue and green world grow larger beneath them. For most of them, this was their first time leaving their home planets. "Look at all that water," whispered Keela, a young dolphin whose own world was covered in calm, shallow seas. Her blue skin shimmered with excitement as she watched the swirling white clouds move across the planet's surface. "The atmospheric density readings are strange," muttered Torok, a crystalline quartzite whose transparent body reflected the light from the viewing port. "These numbers cannot be correct. No civilized species could live in such thick air." Captain Vel, their Nebulan escort, checked his breathing apparatus nervously. His gaseous form flickered inside the containment suit as he read the data. "The gravity is also much stronger than our homeworlds. Everyone will need to be careful when we land." The ship touched down at the spaceport outside the University of Earth Sciences. Through the windows, the students could see a strange yellow star burning in the sky above them. It seemed much too bright and too close compared to the gentle stars they knew from home. "Welcome to Earth," announced the ship's communication system. "Please prepare for disembarkation. Your human contact will meet you at the landing pad." The students gathered their few belongings and followed Captain Vel through the airlock. The moment they stepped outside, several of them stumbled under the unexpected weight of Earth's gravity. The air felt thick and heavy in their breathing systems. A tall human approached them, wearing simple clothing and carrying a datapad. He had brown hair and kind eyes, and he smiled as he walked toward the group. "Hello, everyone," the human said in the common galactic language. "I am Professor David, and I will be your guide during your stay here. Welcome to Earth." The students looked at him with curiosity. This was their first time seeing a human up close. He looked surprisingly normal, though his skin seemed thicker than most species they knew. "Thank you, Professor David," Captain Vel replied. "These students are very excited to begin their studies. They represent some of the best young minds from our peaceful worlds." Professor David nodded and looked at each student. "That is wonderful. We have prepared special accommodations for all of you. The University of Earth Sciences is honored to host the first Galactic Exchange program." As they walked toward the transport vehicles, the students noticed the strange landscape around them. Large green plants grew everywhere, reaching toward the bright star above. The ground felt solid, but somehow different from their homeworlds. "Professor David," asked Nira, a small being from the gentle world of Pacifica, "why is your star so bright?" "Does it not hurt your eyes?" Professor David laughed. "You mean the sun? No, we are used to it. Earth is positioned just right in our solar system. Not too hot, not too cold. We call it the habitable zone." The students exchanged worried glances. What humans called habitable seemed quite extreme to them. They climbed into the transport vehicles, which moved smoothly across the campus grounds. Through the windows, they could see more humans walking around freely under the burning star. Some were even sitting outside on benches, as if the bright light did not bother them at all. "Your campus is very large," observed Rex, a young student, whose species lived in underground cities. "Do all humans live under the open sky like this?" "Most of us do," Professor David replied. "We enjoy being outdoors. Fresh air and sunlight are good for our health." Fresh air and sunlight. The students made mental notes to include these strange human preferences in their reports home. The transport stopped in front of a large building made of stone and metal. Professor David led them inside, where the artificial lighting felt more comfortable to their eyes. "These will be your dormitories," he explained, showing them down a long hallway. "Each room has been specially prepared with the atmospheric conditions your species requires. You will also find communication devices to contact your families back home." The students were relieved to see that their rooms had proper life support systems. The university had done a good job preparing for their arrival. Your classes will begin tomorrow, Professor David continued. We have arranged a special curriculum to help you understand Earth and human civilization. You will study our geology, biology, weather systems, and daily life. Weather systems? Asked Benny, a student whose homeworld had perfectly controlled atmospheric conditions. What are weather systems? Professor David smiled. You will find out tomorrow. Earth has a very dynamic climate that keeps life interesting. The students did not like the sound of the word dynamic when applied to climate. On their worlds, atmospheric conditions were stable and predictable. After Professor David left them to settle in, the students gathered in Keela's room to discuss their first impressions of Earth. Something feels wrong about this place, Torak said, his crystalline form pulsing with nervous energy. The gravity is too strong, the atmosphere is too thick, and that star is definitely too bright. I noticed the plants growing everywhere, added Nira. On my world, we have to carefully cultivate plant life in protected environments. Here, they just grow wild in the open. Rex nodded in agreement. And did you see how casually the humans walked around outside? They act like there is no danger at all. Maybe Earth humans are just very brave, suggested Keela, though she sounded uncertain. Or maybe they do not understand how dangerous their own world is. Torek replied. That night, each student sent their first reports home to their families and planetary governments. The messages were filled with observations about Earth's strange conditions and their concern about human behavior. The gravity here is 2.3 times stronger than our standard, wrote Benny. The humans seem unaffected by this crushing force. The atmospheric pressure readings are unlike anything in our database, reported Torak. Yet the humans breathe this thick air as if it were normal. The star they call Sun emits dangerous levels of radiation, noted Rex. The humans expose themselves to it daily without protective equipment. As they drifted off to sleep in their specially designed quarters, none of the students could have imagined what they would learn in the coming days. They thought they were visiting a slightly unusual but peaceful world to study human culture and education. They had no idea they had just landed on one of the most dangerous planets in the galaxy. Outside their windows, Earth continued its ancient rotation, carrying deadly storms across its surface, shifting massive plates beneath its crust, and exposing all life to the radiation of a nuclear furnace burning in space. The humans slept peacefully through it all, as they had for thousands of years. The next morning, Professor David led the 12 alien students to their first Earth science classroom. The room was bright with natural light streaming through large windows. The students instinctively moved away from the windows, uncomfortable with the direct exposure to the burning star outside. Today we will learn about Earth's geological structure, Professor David announced cheerfully. He activated a large display screen that showed a cross-section of the planet. Torek raised one of his crystalline appendages. Professor, this diagram shows layers inside your planet. Are these layers stable? Oh no, not at all, Professor David replied with enthusiasm. Earth's crust is constantly moving. We call this plate tectonics. The students stared at him in shock. Nira's small form began to tremble. Moving? The ground moves? All the time, Professor David said, pointing to the diagram. These large pieces of crust float on molten rock underneath. They crash into each other, pull apart, and slide past one another. Rex's underground-dwelling instincts kicked in with panic. What happens when they crash? We get earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, Professor David explained matter-of-factly. Sometimes mountains are created, sometimes they are destroyed. The professor clicked to the next slide, showing video footage of an earthquake. Buildings swayed back and forth like plants in wind. Cracks opened in roads. People ran for safety. Torak's crystalline body began to fracture with stress. The solid ground breaks. This is a magnitude 7.2 earthquake from last year, Professor. David continued, seemingly unaware of his students' growing horror. Quite impressive. We study these events to better understand our planet's behavior. Keela's blue skin had turned pale. How often do these earthquakes happen? Oh, small ones happen every day somewhere on Earth. Big ones are less common. But we get several major earthquakes each year. Bainey could not process this information. On his homeworld, the ground had never moved in recorded history. Do humans live in fear of these events? Professor David laughed. Not really. We build our structures to withstand earthquakes, and we have warning systems. Most humans living in earthquake zones just accept it as part of life. The students exchanged terrified glances. These humans lived on unstable ground and considered it normal. After geology class, they moved to biology. The biology professor, Dr. Maria, was a friendly woman with short gray hair. Welcome to Earth Biology, she said warmly. Today we will discuss the human immune system and how we fight off diseases. She began explaining how Earth was full of microscopic organisms that constantly tried to invade human bodies. The students learned about bacteria, viruses, and parasites that lived everywhere around them. These pathogens are on every surface, in the air we breathe, and in the water we drink, Dr. Maria explained. The human body has developed an amazing defense system to fight them. Rex's species had never encountered disease. These tiny creatures they attack living beings? Constantly, Dr. Maria replied. Right now, there are millions of bacteria on your skin, in your mouth, and throughout your environment. Several students immediately activated their personal sanitizing fields. Nira began hyperventilating in her breathing apparatus. But humans just live with this? Keela asked in disbelief. We have no choice, Dr. Maria said with a smile. Our immune systems fight off thousands of potential infections every day. It is an ongoing battle between us and the microbial world. She showed them microscopic images of white blood cells destroying invading bacteria. To the humans, it was fascinating. Science. To the alien students, it looked like a horrific war, happening inside every living creature on Earth. Sometimes the pathogens win, Dr. Maria continued. Humans get sick, and sometimes we die from diseases. But most of the time, our bodies win. The fight. The students could not believe what they were hearing. Earth was not only geologically unstable, but it was also full of invisible enemies trying to kill every living thing. After biology class, Professor David announced they would take a field trip to observe local wildlife. The students reluctantly followed him outside to a nearby park. This is a typical Earth ecosystem, Professor David explained as they walked along a path. Here you can see how different species interact in nature. They sat on benches near a small pond. At first, everything seemed peaceful. Ducks swam in the water, and small birds flew between the trees. Then Keela noticed movement in the grass. What is that small furry creature? Professor David looked where she was pointing. Oh, that is a cat, probably hunting for prey. Hunting? Rex asked nervously. Before Professor David could answer, the cat pounced on something small in the grass. The students watched in horror as the predator caught a mouse in its claws. It is killing that other creature, Nira whispered, backing away from the scene. That is how cats survive, Professor David explained calmly. They are carnivores. They eat other animals. The students stared as the cat carried its prey away. This was their first direct observation of predator-prey relationships. Many Earth species survive by eating other living creatures. Professor David continued, not noticing his students' shock. It is called the food chain. Some animals eat plants, some eat other animals, and some eat both. Bainey's species had evolved beyond the need to consume other living things. The animals kill each other. For food? It is natural selection. Professor David replied. The faster, stronger, or smarter animals survive. The slower or weaker ones become food for others. Torak's crystalline form was now completely fractured with stress. Your entire world is based on violence? Not violence exactly, Professor David said thoughtfully. It is survival. Every species has evolved different strategies to stay alive in a competitive environment. As they walked back toward the university, the students noticed more evidence of this brutal competition. Birds swooped down to catch insects. A spider sat in its web, waiting for prey. Even the plants seemed to be competing for space and sunlight. That evening, the students gathered again in Keela's room. They were all visibly shaken by the day's lessons. I cannot sleep knowing the ground beneath us might crack open at any moment, Rex said, his voice trembling. And there are invisible creatures trying to kill us right now, added Nira, checking her life support systems repeatedly. Did you see how casual the humans were about that cat killing the mouse? Keela shuddered. They act like death is completely normal. Torak's fractured form pulsed with nervous energy. Maybe death is normal on this world. Maybe that is why humans seem so strong. Bani activated his communication device. I am sending an urgent report to my planetary council. Earth is far more dangerous than anyone realized. The other students nodded in agreement. They had only been on Earth for 2 days, but they were already beginning to understand that this was not the peaceful world they had expected to study outside their windows. Earth's nocturnal predators began their nightly hunt, while deep underground, tectonic plates continued their ancient dance of destruction and creation. On their 3rd day at the University of Earth Sciences, the alien students entered their meteorology classroom with heavy hearts. After learning about moving ground and invisible killers, they wondered what new horrors Earth would reveal today. Professor David stood at the front of the classroom, looking out the window with a slight frown. Today we will study Earth's weather systems, he announced. And it looks like we might get a practical demonstration. The students followed his gaze outside. The sky, which had been blue and clear that morning, was now filled with dark gray clouds. The bright star they called the sun had disappeared behind the thick masses. What are those dark formations in the sky? Asked Torak, his crystalline body reflecting the dim light from the windows. Storm clouds, Professor David replied. Earth's atmosphere is very dynamic. Hot air rises, cold air falls, and moisture condenses into water droplets. This creates weather patterns. Rex raised his hand nervously. What kind of weather patterns? Professor David activated the classroom display and began showing images of different weather phenomena. Well, we have rain, snow, hail, thunderstorms, hurricanes, tornadoes, blizzards, and ice storms. The students stared at the images in growing panic. They saw massive spinning clouds that looked like cosmic monsters, walls of water falling from the sky, and white frozen particles that buried entire landscapes. Rain is liquid water falling from the sky, Professor David explained, pointing to an image of humans running with strange portable shelters above their heads. Snow is frozen water crystals. Hail is chunks of ice that form in storm clouds. Nira's small form began shaking. Water falls from the sky. All the time, Professor David said cheerfully. Earth's water cycle depends on precipitation. Water evaporates from oceans and lakes, forms clouds, and then falls back down to Earth. Keela, whose aquatic homeworld had perfectly stable water conditions, could not comprehend this. The water in your sky it just falls down? Gravity pulls it down, Professor David nodded. Sometimes gently, sometimes in huge storms. He clicked to the next slide, showing a tornado. The massive funnel of spinning air destroyed everything in its path, lifting houses and cars into the sky. This is a tornado, Professor David explained. Wind speeds can reach over 300 kilometers per hour. They can pick up almost anything. Throw it around. Bainey's breathing apparatus began making distressed sounds. The air itself becomes violent. In certain atmospheric conditions, yes, Professor David replied. When warm, moist air meets cold, dry air, it can create rotating columns of wind. The professor showed them more images, hurricanes from space that looked like massive spiral galaxies of destruction, lightning bolts that split the sky with deadly electrical energy, and blizzards that buried entire cities under white frozen precipitation. Humans live through all of these events? Rex asked in disbelief. We adapt, Professor David said simply. We build storm shelters, we have weather prediction systems, and we learn to prepare for seasonal changes. Suddenly, the room grew darker. Through the windows, the students could see the storm clouds moving closer. The wind began to pick up, making strange howling sounds as it moved around the building. Speaking of storms, Professor David said, looking outside, it looks like we are about to experience one. The first raindrops hit the windows with soft tapping sounds. Within minutes, the tapping became a steady drumming. The alien students watched in fascination and terror as liquid water poured down from the sky. This is incredible, whispered Killa. The water just appears from nowhere. Not from nowhere, Professor David corrected. It evaporated from the ocean this morning, traveled hundreds of kilometers in the atmosphere, and now it is returning to Earth. The rain grew heavier. The students could hear it hitting the roof above them like millions of tiny impacts. Some of them instinctively ducked, expecting the ceiling to collapse under the assault. Then came the thunder. The first rumble was distant and low, like some massive creature groaning in the sky. The students looked around nervously, not understanding what they were hearing. What was that sound? Torak asked, his crystalline form beginning to fracture with stress. Thunder, Professor David replied. It is the sound that lightning makes when it heats the air. Lightning? Nira squeaked out before Professor David could explain. The sky outside exploded with brilliant white light. For a split second, the entire landscape was illuminated as if by an enormous flashbulb. The students screamed and threw themselves to the floor. The thunder that followed was deafening. It shook the building and rattled the windows. Several students activated their emergency beacon devices, thinking they were under attack. It is okay, Professor David said calmly, though he had to raise his voice over their panicked cries. That was just lightning. It is a natural electrical discharge in the atmosphere. Electrical discharge? Rex gasped from where he had hidden. Under his desk, the sky is trying to electrocute us? Lightning is quite common during thunderstorms, Professor David explained, seemingly unaware that his students were having collective nervous breakdowns. The electrical charge builds up in the clouds and then discharges to the ground. Another flash of lightning lit up the sky, followed immediately by a crack of thunder that made the building shake. This time, 3 students activated their emergency evacuation signals. Turn those off, Professor David said gently. This is just a normal spring thunderstorm. Humans experience these all the time. Normal? Bainey cried, his voice muffled by his emergency protective covering. You call this normal? The storm continued for another hour. Rain poured down in sheets, lightning split the sky every few minutes, and thunder rolled across the landscape like the footsteps of giants. The wind howled around the building, making it creak and groan. The alien students huddled together in the center of the classroom, as far from the windows as possible. They watched in amazement and horror as human students outside ran between buildings, some of them actually laughing as they got soaked by the falling water. Look at them, Killa whispered, pointing at the humans outside. They are not afraid. Some of them seem to be enjoying it, observed Torak with disbelief. Indeed, several human students had stopped running and were standing in the rain with their faces turned up to the sky, letting the water fall on them directly. Professor David, Rex called out from his hiding spot. Do humans have some kind of protective ability against this weather attack? Professor David looked confused. Weather attack? This is just rain and thunder. Humans have been living with weather for thousands of years. Our ancestors survived ice ages, droughts, and massive storms. Ice ages? Nero whimpered. Oh yes, Professor David said, warming to the topic. Earth's climate has changed dramatically over time. Sometimes the entire planet was covered in ice. Sometimes it was much hotter than today. Early humans had to adapt to all kinds of extreme conditions. The students could not process this information. A planet where the climate could change so drastically that the entire surface froze solid. And humans had somehow survived it all. When the storm finally passed, the alien students sat in stunned silence. Outside, the sun had returned, and humans were walking around normally as if nothing dangerous had just happened. Some were even taking pictures of the colorful arc that had appeared in the sky. What is that colored bridge in the sky? Torek asked weakly. A rainbow, Professor David replied with a smile. Light refracted through water droplets in the atmosphere. Quite beautiful, is it not? The students looked at each other with the same thought. These humans found beauty in the aftermath of an atmospheric assault that had nearly killed them all with fear. The fourth day at the University of Earth Sciences began with what Professor David called physical education class. The alien students followed him to a large indoor facility filled with strange metal objects and padded surfaces. Today you will observe how humans maintain their physical fitness, Professor David announced. Physical exercise is an important part of human health and culture. The students watched as dozens of human students entered the facility and began doing incomprehensible things. Some lifted heavy metal objects repeatedly. Others ran on moving platforms that went nowhere. Some hung from bars and pulled their bodies up and down. What are they doing? Asked Keela, watching a human woman lift a metal bar loaded with circular weights above her head. Exercising, Professor David replied. Humans deliberately stress their muscles to make them stronger. We call it working out. Rex could not understand this concept. They are hurting themselves on purpose. Not hurting exactly, Professor David explained. When muscles work against resistance, they grow stronger. The process can be uncomfortable, but it improves human physical capabilities. The students watched in horror as humans pushed their bodies to obvious limits. Their faces turned red, sweat poured from their skin, and they breathed heavily. Some made sounds of effort and strain. They appear to be in distress, Nira observed. With concern. That is normal, Professor David said cheerfully. No pain, no gain, as we say. Torak's crystalline form pulsed with confusion. Your species voluntarily experiences pain to become stronger? Before Professor David could answer, a young human man approached them. He was breathing heavily and wiping sweat from his face with a cloth. Hey, Professor David, the student said. Casually, great workout today. I am finally back to full strength after breaking my leg last month. The alien student stared at him in shock. Bainey activated his universal translator to make sure he had heard correctly. You broke your leg? Rex asked the human student directly. Yeah, skiing accident, the human replied with a smile. Compound fracture of the tibia. Had to have surgery and everything. But the bone is stronger now than it was before. The human student walked away to continue his workout. The alien students turned to Professor David with expressions of complete bewilderment. His bone was broken? Kilo whispered. And he survived? Added Nira. Human bones can heal from fractures, Professor David explained matter-of-factly. In fact, the healed bone is often stronger than the original. Human bodies are quite resilient. The students could not process this information. On their homeworlds, a broken bone was usually fatal or permanently disabling. How many injuries can humans survive? Torek asked nervously. Professor David thought for a moment. Well, humans have survived losing limbs, major organ damage, severe burns, multiple bone fractures, blood loss, and all kinds of trauma. Our medical technology helps, but the human body has remarkable healing abilities. The group moved to another area where humans were engaged in different activities. Some were hitting each other with padded gloves while others watched and cheered. What is happening there? Rex pointed at the boxing ring. That is sparring, Professor David explained. A form of combat training. They are practicing fighting. Techniques. Fighting. Bainey's breathing apparatus began making distressed sounds again. They fight each other for training? Humans evolved as hunters and warriors, Professor David said. Physical combat skills were necessary for survival. Now we practice these skills for sport and fitness. The students watched as two humans exchanged blows, moving quickly and hitting each other with controlled force. What shocked the aliens most was that both fighters were smiling. They enjoy this violence? Nira asked in disbelief. It is not really violence when both people agree to it, Professor David replied. It is competition and skill development. After the physical education observation, Professor David led them to the campus cafeteria for lunch. The students thought this would be a calm break from the morning's revelations. They were wrong. The cafeteria was filled with humans consuming various substances. The alien students watched in fascination as humans poured dark liquid from large containers and drank it eagerly. What is that black liquid? Asked Keela. Coffee, Professor David replied. A stimulant beverage. The caffeine helps humans stay alert and focused. Stimulant? Torak's form flickered with concern. They are consuming drugs? Caffeine is a mild stimulant, Professor David explained. Most humans consume it daily without problems. At another table, a human student was eating something that made his face turn red and sweat appear on his forehead. He kept drinking water but continued eating the same food. That human appears to be poisoned, Rex observed with alarm. Professor David looked over and chuckled. Oh, he is eating spicy food. Humans enjoy the sensation of capsaicin, the chemical that makes peppers hot. He is consuming poison for pleasure? Bainey asked in shock. It is not really poison, Professor David said, though capsaicin does trigger pain receptors. Many humans find the sensation enjoyable. The students watched as other humans consumed various substances that would have been toxic to their species. Some drank fermented liquids that affected their behavior. Others ate bitter substances mixed with sugar. Many consumed the caffeinated beverages throughout the meal. Your species regularly ingests chemicals that alter your body chemistry, Nira stated, trying to understand. Food and drink are sources of pleasure for humans, Professor David explained. We enjoy flavors, textures, and even sensations that might seem extreme to other species. After lunch, they passed by outdoor recreational areas where humans were engaged in various activities. Some were running at high speeds around a track. Others were swimming in large containers of water. They voluntarily enter that much water? Killa asked, watching the swimmers. Swimming is excellent exercise, Professor David replied. Though I suppose it might seem dangerous to non-aquatic species. What if they cannot stay afloat? Rex worried. Then they would drown, Professor David said simply. That is why we teach swimming skills from an early age. The students saw humans climbing artificial rock walls, jumping over barriers, and throwing heavy objects as far as they could. Every activity seemed designed to push human bodies to their limits. Do humans ever choose safe, gentle activities? Torek asked desperately. Professor David pointed to a group of humans sitting under trees with books. Some humans enjoy reading outdoors. The students felt relieved until they noticed these humans were sitting directly under the burning star, with no protection except thin fabric and strange, dark coverings over their eyes. They are exposing themselves to radiation from your star, Bainey observed. Sunbathing is popular, Professor David agreed. Humans need some sun exposure for vitamin D production. Though too much can cause skin damage. Skin damage? Nira squeaked. Sunburn, premature aging, sometimes skin cancer, Professor David listed. Casually, that is why we use sunscreen and limit exposure time. The alien students realized that even the most peaceful human activities involved calculated risks that would terrify most galactic species. That evening, the students held another emergency meeting in Keela's room. Their reports home had become increasingly frantic over the past few days. They poison themselves for fun, Rex said, pacing around the room. They break their bones and get stronger, added Bainey. They fight each other as entertainment, Nira contributed. And they expose themselves to stellar radiation while reading books, Torak concluded. The students looked at each other with a growing realization. Humans did not just survive on this deadly world by accident. They had evolved to thrive in conditions that would kill most other species, and they seemed to enjoy pushing their limits even further. I think we need to reconsider what we know about humans, Keela said quietly. On the fifth morning, the alien students woke to find emergency messages flooding their communication devices. The reports they had been sending home throughout the week had caused panic across multiple star systems. Emergency Council meeting. Earth classification under review. Read one message from the Galactic Educational Consortium. Immediate risk assessment required, stated another from the Delphin High Command. Evacuation ships dispatched, announced a third from the quartzite. Crystal Council. The students gathered in the common area, their faces showing a mixture of relief and continued terror. Through the windows, they could see Professor David approaching the dormitory building, walking casually across the campus as if the ground beneath his feet was not constantly threatening to crack open. The evacuation ships will arrive this afternoon, Captain Vell announced over the communication system. All students must prepare for immediate departure. Professor David entered the building and found the students huddled together with their few belongings already packed. Is everything all right? He asked with genuine concern. I received word that your stay is being cut short. Our governments have classified Earth as extremely dangerous. Torak explained, his crystalline form still fractured from stress. We are being evacuated for our safety. Professor David looked confused. Dangerous? But you have been perfectly safe here. The university has excellent safety protocols. Professor David, Keela said gently, your planet is trying to kill everything that lives on it. I am sorry, but I do not understand, Professor David replied, sitting down to face the students. What has made you feel unsafe? Rex began listing their observations. Your ground moves and breaks open without warning. Your air is full of creatures trying to infect us with diseases. Water falls from your sky, along with electrical attacks. Your star burns everything with radiation. And your people voluntarily hurt themselves for entertainment, added Nira. You consume poisons for pleasure, continued Bainey. You fight each other as a hobby, Torak concluded. And you expose yourselves to deadly conditions while calling it relaxation. Finished Keela. Professor David listened to their list with growing amazement. These are all normal parts of life on Earth. Humans have adapted to these conditions over millions of years. That is exactly the problem, Rex said quietly. Your species has adapted to survive in conditions that would kill most galactic civilizations. Before Professor David could respond, alert signals began sounding across the campus. The students immediately activated their emergency protocols, thinking another disaster was beginning. What is that alarm? Nira cried, covering her audio receptors. Professor. David listened calmly to the announcement. Fire drill, he said simply. All students and staff practice evacuating the buildings in case of emergency. Through the windows, they watched as hundreds of humans calmly walked out of buildings and gathered in designated areas. Nobody seemed panicked or afraid. Fire? Banny asked weakly. Uncontrolled combustion, Professor David explained. Buildings can sometimes catch fire from electrical problems, cooking accidents, or other causes. We practice evacuation procedures regularly. The alien students realized that humans had to regularly practice escaping from yet another way their environment could kill them. And they did it calmly, as if it were perfectly normal. Your buildings can spontaneously combust? Torek asked, in disbelief. Not spontaneously exactly, Professor David replied. But fire is a constant risk on Earth. Humans learned to control fire thousands of years ago, but it can still be dangerous if not properly managed. The fire drill ended, and humans began walking back into the buildings, chatting and laughing as if they had not just practiced fleeing from potential death. Look at them, Killa whispered in awe. They act like danger is completely normal. Because it is normal for us, Professor David said, finally beginning to understand their perspective. Earth has always been a challenging environment. Humans evolved here, so we are adapted to these conditions. But how do you sleep at night? Rex asked desperately. Knowing that earthquakes could split the ground open, storms could destroy your buildings, diseases could invade your bodies, and fires could consume everything around you. Professor David considered this question seriously. I suppose we focus on the beauty and wonder of our world rather than the dangers. Yes, Earth can be harsh, but it is also magnificent. The same forces that create storms also create rainbows. The same star that can burn us also gives us light and warmth. The same ground that shakes also grows the food we eat. The students could not comprehend this perspective. To them, Earth was a nightmare world where everything was trying to kill them. To humans, it was home. In the afternoon, 3 sleek evacuation ships descended from orbit. The Galactic Educational Consortium had sent their fastest vessels to retrieve the traumatized students. Captain Vell emerged from the lead ship with a full hazmat suit and emergency medical equipment. Are you all alive? He called out, scanning the area for immediate threats. We are physically unharmed, Torek replied, though his fractured crystalline structure suggested significant psychological damage. As the students prepared to board the evacuation ships, Professor David approached them one final time. I am sorry your visit was not what you expected, he said sincerely. I hope you will remember that humans are peaceful people, even if our world seems dangerous to you. Professor David, Killa said softly, we do not think humans are dangerous because you are violent. We think you are dangerous because you are the most resilient species we have ever encountered. Any civilization that can evolve on a world like this, Rex added, must be incredibly strong. You survive conditions that would destroy our homeworlds, Nira continued. You adapt to threats that would eliminate our species. And you do it all while smiling and finding joy in your daily lives, Benny concluded. Professor David looked touched by their words. Thank you. I never thought of humans that way. The students boarded their evacuation ships, taking one last look at the university campus. Human students were still walking around outside, sitting under the burning star, breathing the thick air, living on the unstable ground as if none of it posed any threat at all. As the ships lifted off, the alien students pressed against the viewing ports to watch Earth shrink below them. From space, the planet looked beautiful, blue oceans, white clouds, green continents. It was impossible to see the constant dangers lurking on the surface. Final report to Galactic Educational Consortium, Captain Vell announced over the ship's communication system. Earth has been reclassified as a Category 5 Deathworld. All future diplomatic contact with humans should be conducted in space stations or on neutral worlds. Reason for reclassification? Asked the voice from Galactic Command. The alien students looked at each other, then Killa responded for the group. The humans have evolved on a world so dangerous that they consider constant mortal peril to be normal daily life. They are not aware that they are the most formidable species in the galaxy, which makes them even more dangerous. The evacuation ship set course for their respective homeworlds, carrying 12 traumatized students who would spend years in therapy, trying to forget the horrors they had witnessed on the peaceful university campus of Earth. Behind them, Professor David stood in the campus courtyard, watching the ships disappear into space. Tomorrow, he would teach his regular Earth science classes to human students who would never realize how extraordinary their ordinary lives truly were.